He was born in silence, in a house where the father's voice crushed dreams and the mother's silence felt like prophecy. From the beginning, he was not seen, not truly. He grew up chasing recognition, not power. He wanted to paint, to be accepted, to be someone. But the world said no. The academy rejected him, twice, and so he stayed in Vienna, alone, broke, drifting. He slept in shelters, sketched postcards, read newspapers, and in those pages he found ideas, dangerous ones, anti-Semitism, nationalism, revenge. He began to believe there were enemies, and that he could be the one to fix everything. Then came the war, the first one. He volunteered. On the battlefield he felt needed. He earned medals. He was a soldier. But Germany lost. The Treaty of Versailles carved humiliation into the soul of a nation. He came home to ruins, and he made a decision. I will raise Germany. I will take revenge. He joined a small party. He began to speak, not like a politician, like a prophet. He shouted, he gestured, he hypnotized. Crowds listened. Crowds believed. He gave them an enemy, the internal destroyer. He gave them a symbol, a slogan, a promise. I will give you pride. He tried to seize power, failed, was arrested. But in prison, he wrote, Mein Kampf, a book that drew a future with only one path, his, and that path led to power. In 1933, he became chancellor. A year later, Führer, he built the Third Reich, created the Gestapo, built camps, cultivated a personality cult. He declared, we will be great again, and the world watched. Then came war. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, Norway, the Balkans, the Soviet Union. He wanted the world. And while the world hesitated, he advanced. But behind the front lines, something darker grew. Trains rolled. Camps expanded. Children vanished. Silence deepened. He didn't just kill, he built a system. 6 million Jews, millions of others. This wasn't war. This was machinery, a factory of death. And when it all collapsed, he locked himself in a bunker, married Eva Braun. A day later, suicide. His body burned, his empire gone. But even in death, shadows remained. Theories, rumors, Argentina, Antarctica, UFOs, that he escaped, that he was a pawn, that elites funded him. But the truth is simpler. He was a man, with pain, with dreams, with hatred. And he became someone who wasn't stopped in time. This isn't just a story about a dictator. It's a warning about how loneliness can become ideology, about how a dream can turn into fanaticism, about how silence can kill. And if you're hearing this story, you've already begun to understand he didn't go to war out of duty. He went to feel needed, to disappear into the uniform, the formation, the sound of gunfire. In 1914, he volunteered, and for the first time, he felt accepted. He was part of something vast. He was a soldier. He earned medals. He wrote letters filled with pride. He believed Germany was him, and if she suffered, he suffered with her. If she was humiliated, he would restore her honor. He didn't fear death. He feared being no one. But Germany lost, and he couldn't accept it. He didn't see military defeat. He saw betrayal, conspiracy. He searched for those to blame, and he found them. He returned to a country with no order, no faith, no future. And in that emptiness, a decision was born. I will not let this happen again. I will bring back strength. I will bring back fear. War became his revelation, not as horror, but as meaning. It gave him shape, gave him voice, gave him purpose. He understood. Only through struggle comes order. Only through blood comes control. Only through war could he become who he was meant to be. He didn't dream of power. He dreamed of recognition, of being seen, of hearing someone say, you're talented, you matter. He painted streets, faces, shadows. He believed art was the path. In 1907, he traveled to Vienna, applied to the Academy of Fine Arts, rejected. In 1908, tried again, rejected again. And in that no, he didn't hear critique. He heard a sentence. He stayed in the city, alone, penniless, without family, without purpose. He slept in shelters, sketched postcards, read newspapers. And in those papers, he first encountered ideas that would change him. Anti-Semitism, nationalism, revenge. He began to believe someone was guilty, that someone had stolen his future, that he was the one who had to fix it. The dream of being an artist faded. What remained was pain, and that pain searched for form, and it found it in ideology, in slogans, in hatred. What was born wasn't a leader, but a believer, not a dictator, but a man who decided that if the world wouldn't accept him, he would make it listen. He wasn't a politician. He was a voice, loud, passionate, wounded. He didn't speak for policy. He spoke for pain, for revenge, for the belief that the world could be reshaped by words. He joined a party no one knew and made it the center of attention. He spoke in a way that made people forget to doubt. He shouted, he gestured, he stared into eyes. And in those eyes, they didn't see a man. They saw an idea. He gave them an enemy, internal. He gave them a slogan. One people, one nation, one Führer. He gave them a symbol. He gave them hope disguised as fanaticism. He spoke of pride, purity, strength, and everyone who listened felt part of something greater. He turned fear into faith, loneliness into belonging. He turned words into weapons. In 1923, he tried to seize power. The beer hall putsch, failure, arrest. But even in prison, he didn't go silent. He wrote Mein Kampf, not just a book, a manifesto, a map of the future, a future with only one path, his. And when he walked free, he would no longer be just a voice. He would be the echo of a nation. He didn't seize power by force. It was given to him by people tired of chaos, of hunger, of humiliation. They wanted order, a voice that would say, "You will be great again." And he said it. He became chancellor, legally, through elections, through trust, through fear, through hope. Then the president died, and he merged the powers. No gunfire, no revolution, just a signature, just silence. And now he was Führer, one man, one nation. He built the Third Reich, created the Gestapo, the camps, the cult of personality. He turned the state into a mirror of his will. This war wasn't sudden, it was expected, prepared, dreamed of. It wasn't a catastrophe, it was a promise of strength, a promise of revenge, a promise of return. He spoke of it for years in books and speeches and marches. He painted the enemy, internal, external. He said, "We were betrayed. We were humiliated. We will take back what's ours." And people listened. People believed. They marched. They built tanks. They raised flags. They taught children to hate. War became a ritual, a dream, a cleansing. And when it began, no one was surprised. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland. It was all part of the plan. He didn't just invade or he reclaimed. He didn't just attack. He restored the justice he had invented. The world watched. The world hesitated. And he kept going. France, Norway, the Balkans, the Soviet Union. He wanted everything. He believed history belonged to the strong, that the weak must vanish, that war wasn't horror, it was order. And millions followed him, willingly, with songs, with faith, with hatred. This wasn't just a war, it was a culmination of an idea they accepted, of words that became weapons, of fear that became law. It was the war they were waiting for, and the war no one stopped in time. He built an empire where every step obeyed his will. He created enemies, laws, fear. He made millions march, believe, stay silent. But in the end, he was alone, in a bunker, underground, in a city collapsing above him. He heard them coming. He knew it was over. He married a woman who had lived in his shadow. He wrote a will. He blamed everyone but himself. He chose poison. He chose a bullet. He chose fire. He didn't want to be captured, didn't want to be judged, didn't want to be dissected. He wanted to vanish, quickly, without a trace. And he vanished. His body burned. His name remained. His ideas did not. His empire turned to ash. But one question lingered. Why did he choose that end? Because he knew he'd lost, or because he couldn't live in a world that no longer feared him? It wasn't just the end of a man. It was the end of an era he created, an era he destroyed, an era he couldn't survive. And in that silence, only memory remained. And a warning. This darkness didn't vanish. It didn't dissolve into ash. It remained. In photographs, in names, in numbers too large to grasp. Millions, 6 million, Jews, Roma, prisoners, children, people who simply existed, who lived, who disappeared. Trains rolled, no windows, no words. People stood inside, silent. Camps operated like clockwork. Gas chambers, furnaces, lists, everything was organized. Everything was calculated. This wasn't rage, it was a system. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. He didn't just kill, he built a mechanism. He turned people into numbers, into dust, into silence. And that silence is the most terrifying, because it remains in museums, in books, in the eyes of those who survived, in the voices of those who speak, in the memory of those who cannot forget. This darkness is not the past. It is a warning that a human can become a machine, that an idea can become a factory of death, that silence can become an accomplice. And if we look at it, we must remember, because to forget is to repeat.
He died, quickly, quietly, in a bunker, underground, in a city that no longer belonged to him. His body was burned, his empire vanished, his idea scattered, but not everything disappeared. Shadows remained, questions remained, theories remained. They said he escaped to Argentina, to Antarctica, that he lived under another name, that he was rescued, that he was a pawn, that others stood behind him, that he was just a mask, that it was all part of a larger plan. People searched for traces, for photos, for documents, for meaning. But the more they searched, the more they lost. Because the truth isn't about where he died. It's about why he became who he did, why millions followed him, why words became weapons, why fear became law. And if we're still asking these questions, it means we're still afraid it could happen again. These theories aren't just speculation. They're reflections of our anxiety, our memory, our responsibility. Because history doesn't die with a man. It lives in us. And if we don't understand it, it returns. He built an empire out of words, fear, and belief. He made millions march, stay silent, worship. He created enemies, laws, camps. He turned a nation into a mirror of his will. But in the end, he was alone, not on a podium, not in a hall, but in a bunker underground, in a city that no longer belonged to him. He heard it collapsing, the walls trembling, the army vanishing. He knew it was over. He married a woman who had lived in his shadow. He wrote a will. He blamed everyone but himself. He chose poison. He chose a bullet. He chose fire. He didn't want to be captured, didn't want to be judged, didn't want to be dissected. He wanted to vanish quickly, without a trace. And he vanished. His body was burned, his voice silenced, his ideas scattered, his empire turned to ash. But one question remained. Why did he choose that end? Because he knew he'd lost? Or because he couldn't live in a world that no longer feared him? It wasn't just the end of a man. It was the end of an era he created, an era he destroyed, an era he couldn't survive. And in that silence, only memory remained, and a warning.
This was only the first part. The next chapter comes this Saturday, even closer to the truth. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss it.
September 1st, 1939, 4:40 a.m., Poland, is still asleep. In the small town of Wielun, where the streets smell of bread and the windows are still fogged from the night's breath, people are awakened by a sound that is like neither wind nor thunder. It is the roar of engines. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, dives down like predators and drops the first bombs. Without warning, without a declaration of war. The first target is not a military installation, but a hospital. This is not a mistake. It is a demonstration. In this moment, history ceases to be diplomacy. It becomes fire. A few months before this, in the dark offices of the Reich Chancellery, Hitler and his generals, von Brauchitsch, von Bock, Rundstedt, sit over a map of Poland. It is not just geography. It is a chessboard. Poland must be destroyed as a state, says Hitler. Fall Weiss, whispers Franz Halder, the chief of the general staff. Case white. They decide to strike from three sides, from the north, through East Prussia, from the west, through Silesia, from the south, through Slovakia. This is not just strategy. This is surgery. They want to carve Poland out of Europe. German tanks, Panzer I and II, race down the roads like iron snakes. Behind them, infantry, motorized columns, artillery. In the sky are the Stukas, dive bombers, wailing their sirens to paralyze the will. Imagine, you are a Polish soldier. You have a rifle, a horse, and faith. And against you, machines, the sky, and silence. The Polish army is brave but outdated. Radio communication is weak. Coordination is broken. Cities fall one after another. Łódź, Krakow, Warsaw. But the most terrible thing is not the fall of walls. It is the fall of hope. September 17th. As Poland is already bleeding out, a second blow comes from the east. The Soviet Union, according to the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, invades the eastern lands. We are protecting the Belarusian and Ukrainian population, says Moscow, but this is a lie. This is the division of spoils. Imagine, you are a commander on the eastern border. You were not expecting a war. And suddenly, tanks, soldiers, orders. You don't know who to shoot. You don't know who to trust. October 6, 1939. The Polish campaign is over. Poland capitulates. The territory is divided between Germany and the USSR. Slovakia gets a peace. The Polish government is in exile. The people are in fear, in captivity, in uncertainty. And Europe? On September 3rd, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany. But they do not fire a shot. This is the phony war. The world watches, but does not act, as if it is afraid to admit that evil has already stepped out of the shadows. Germany, Walter von Brauchitsch, Gerd von Rundstedt, Fedor von Bock. Poland, Edward Ritz-Schmigwy, Władysław Bortnowski, Tadeusz Piskor. But behind these names are not just generals. They are the people who made decisions upon which the fates of millions depended, some with cold calculation, some with desperation. What did the people feel? The Polish peasant loses his land, his home, his language. The Polish child loses their school, their family, their childhood. The German soldier marches with an order, but without understanding. The Soviet officer enters a foreign country, calling it liberation. The world loses the illusion of security. This is not just the beginning of a war. It is the beginning of the end of the old world. Poland became a victim not only of tanks, but of treaties, betrayals, and silence. History is not only what happened, it is what we allowed to happen. Expert opinion. The invasion of Poland, the beginning of the end of the old world. By Ph.D. in history, specialist in 20th century European military policy. September 1st, 1939, is not just the start date of the Second World War. It is the moment when diplomacy definitively gave way to violence, and international guarantees proved to be empty words. Germany's invasion of Poland, Operation Fall Weiss, became not only a military campaign, but also the moral collapse of the European security system built after the First World War. Geopolitical context. After the signing of the Munich Agreement in 1938, when the Western powers effectively allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, it became clear the policy of appeasement would not stop the aggressor. Germany, strengthened after the humiliation of Versailles, was striving for revenge. Poland, caught between two totalitarian regimes, Nazi and Soviet, became the first victim of their secret collusion. The secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed on August 23, 1939, divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. This agreement became the moral bankruptcy of international politics. Two regimes, hostile in ideology, found common ground in the destruction of sovereign states. Military assessment. From a military standpoint, Operation Fall Weiss was a model of Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Germany applied the newest tactics. The coordination of tank divisions, air power, and infantry allowed them to break through the Polish defense in a matter of days. The Polish army, despite its heroism, was not prepared for this level of mechanized warfare. The strike from the east on September 17th was especially tragic. The Soviet invasion was a stab in the back for the Poles. This not only hastened the fall of Poland, but also showed that in this war there was no room for neutrality, no third party. Everyone was either a participant or a victim. Psychological and moral aspect. For the Polish people, this was not just a defeat. It was the annihilation of a state, a culture, an identity. The people found themselves between two totalitarian machines, each of which brought repression, deportations, and death. For Europe, it was a moment of epiphany. By declaring war on Germany but taking no active measures, Great Britain and France demonstrated a tragic sluggishness. This allowed Hitler to consolidate his position and continue his aggression. Conclusion: the invasion of Poland is not just a historical fact, it is a lesson. It shows how quickly states collapse when international solidarity disappears, how easily evil penetrates when it is not called by its name, and how important it is to remember a war does not begin with a gunshot. It begins with silence.
Zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft restlos uns gehört.
They did not arrive with screams. They arrived with a rumble, a low distant growl rising from the earth like breath from machines, like a warning that no longer asked permission. The cobblestones trembled, the tracks carved through stone, and the air held its silence. No gunfire, no voices, only footsteps, only steel only. History moving forward without consent, faces appeared in windows, some filled with worry, some already empty, and some simply closed the curtains as if that could stop what was coming. A window cracked, not from fire but from pressure. Mannequins collapsed inside like forgotten dreams. The world did not burn, it shattered. She ran not with panic but with purpose, clutching her child tighter than breath, behind her smoke ahead, only the unknown. The crowd moved like a river without a bed. Bags, faces, questions no one could answer. The school remained, books open, chairs overturned, yesterday's lesson.
As the sun rose on April 9, 1940, Denmark lay under the shadow of German soldiers, while Norway braced for the storm of invasion. In Copenhagen, King Christian X stood tall, a symbol of dignity amidst chaos. "This is a moment of grave significance, Your Majesty. Our people look to you for strength." The king's gaze was steady, yet heavy with the weight of his decisions. "To capitulate so swiftly, it feels unjust." Meanwhile, across the waters in Norway, King Hakon VII gathered his government. Determination etched on his face. "We shall not surrender. Our honor demands we resist, even if the odds are against us." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, but fear lingered in the air. "Your Majesty, the British and French forces are on their way, but we must prepare for the worst." King Hakon turned to his advisors, resolve hardening in his voice. "We will fight for our land, for our people. Let them know we shall not go quietly." As the shadows deepened, both kings understood the stakes. The echoes of their decisions would resonate through history, marking the struggle of small nations against tyranny. They did not come to negotiate. They came with maps and clocks, with routes and deadlines, with orders and silence. In the night between April 8th and 9th, 1940 German ships were already moving through the cold waters of the Skagerrak. In the sky bombers flew in the war rooms, voices spoke of Operation Weserübung, the plan to invade Denmark and Norway simultaneously without a declaration of war, without warning, without choice. Kokahering woke up under the shadow of German soldiers. King Christian X did not surrender, but he did not resist either. He remained on the throne as a symbol of dignity in a country where resistance became a gesture, not an action. Denmark capitulated in 6 hours, not because it lacked courage, but because it understood the cost of pointless bloodshed. The streets filled with foreign footsteps, but the flags remained hanging as a memory of what once was. Norway was unprepared, but not. They came back not as heroes, but as shadows. They stepped onto familiar streets that no longer felt familiar. They opened doors that remembered them, but they did not remember themselves. The war had ended, but it had not left. It lived in their silence, in the way they stared at walls, in the way they answered, "I'm fine," when they meant, "I don't know who I am anymore." They sat at tables where laughter used to live now, replaced by quiet glances and unfinished sentences. They walked through cities rebuilt, but felt the ruins inside. They touched photographs and felt nothing. They heard music and felt everything. They tried to sleep. But the war came back in dreams, not with guns, but with faces, not with screams, but with absence. They carried medals in drawers they never opened. They avoided mirrors. They avoided questions. They avoided themselves. Some wrote books, some drank in silence. Some stood by windows waiting.
And you know, when everything had been said, not in words but in footsteps, not in letters but in orders, not in choices but in routes, only silence remained. Can you believe that? Silence. In the streets where names no longer echoed, in the homes where no one asked when you'd return. It's just so profound. Silence in the fjords where foreign uniforms reflected alongside fading memories. Wow, only memory remained, not as a document but as breath, as a trace in stone, as a glance through a window where no one stands anymore. And listen to this. Only history remained, not as a list of dates, but as a question that still lingers in every step, in every refusal, in every silence. It's powerful. Only truth remained. That even a small country can become a symbol, that even brief resistance can become eternity. Isn't that incredible? That even in defeat, one can remain oneself, and that silence sometimes speaks louder than victory.